lust without love is pleasure. Lust with love is passion. Love without lust is pristine. Love with lust is poetry. Lust, viewed as a cure for our dullness, an experience that brings fulfillment within our meaningless existence, a shameful sickness, an addictive disease that has corrupted and warped our society. How we frown upon ourselves when succumbing to these urges to satisfy our deepest, darkest desires. For many, it's a way of life. For myself, it is a beautiful reflection of ourselves. Why must humans be ashamed for their own beautiful ways? Is it not human to be driven with lust? Why bring torture upon oneself to keep those desires hidden away from this miserable, mundane world? Why feel ashamed for these inner tendencies when those who demonize you have desires that are far more creative and darker? For myself, I envision lust as a canvas for poetry, to weave a beautiful high, an opportunity to use skill and imagination to bring a passionate aesthetic into something that has been terribly dulled out with such primitive intentions. In my wonderland, it is an art that rewards one's senses of taste and touch with something experimental, something that is unfamiliar, forever imprinted in one's mind. Even in the shadow of this cruel world, I view lust as an artistic sin that will never fail on bringing a smile to one's face. But for today's tale of terror, my friends, takes us to a paradise, a world that is not for everyone, but for those who are helpless on challenging themselves with new ways to satisfy their sexual urges. That within the world of human lust, there are those who tend to wander into the darkest parts of this world, helpless to the overwhelming desires of uncovering new experiences after growing tired of the sexual activities on this mortal realm. Like a moth being drawn into a flame. The gentleman you see before you is one who had ventured deeper into the shadows of lust, and has successfully reached his own wonderland when calling upon the Cenobites, rewarding him with everything he desired plus more. My friends, this man, whose name is no longer important, this mutilated torso hanging on hooks, surrounded by flesh and bones artistically fashioned and molded into reflections of an imagination that had reached a new level of creativity, for his pleasure now resides in the hands of an artist. His mistress, rewarding him with the given name, My Sweet, for his body and soul now belongs to her, the goddess of this paradise. Beyond the pain, the intense craving for her caressing touch, the sensations that would send My Sweet into a wave of ecstasy when she would come, slicing his flesh with uncanny precision, the waves of pain that would arouse him when she would peel away bits and pieces of My Sweet for her works of art. Did you know that there are pieces of My Sweet within the greatest of her creations? Oh, how he truly desired his mistress, that beyond the physical pleasure, somehow My Sweet had been infected with these inner feelings, something that he never felt before, a warming feeling that would leave My Sweet desiring more. Could it be that he had fallen for this demonic mistress, the only woman who had managed to bring this man to his knees? If he could only share these feelings, tell her how he truly felt when she would look at her precious lover. Except, when My Sweet was first brought into this paradise, the tongue was one of the first things to go. God, how much he desired her, to feel her, to taste her, these urges to love her. How much he wanted to tell her this. But it wasn't long before trouble came to paradise, and My Sweet began to experience the torment of this unusual high, these warming feelings being soured when seeing the delivery boy bringing new meat for the mistress, the one who brought him into this paradise, My Sweet. Realizing that his sexual bliss was being infected with a strange madness, an inner struggle to deny the scenery before him, trying to deny telling himself that there was another reason why this delivery boy kept entering her domain. Was he reading too much into things? Every fiber of his being trying to tell him that he was wrong. As time progressed, my sweet would find his denials being crushed and come to learn the painful truth of this wonderland. A pain that struck deeper than anything he had ever imagined when witnessing this delivery boy tasting her flesh, those hands caressing her pale body. How blind my sweet had been to ever think that he had been blessed with a fantasy. The cruelty of knowing his heightened senses would be the instruments of torture. My sweet feeling everything that he desired in the air happening right before him, the ultimate sexual experience that he had desperately craved since feeling her touch, everything being given to this delivery boy. The passion when seeing her hands running down his body, razor-sharp fingers cutting into his flesh, this was something more than physical satisfaction, a love that my sweet had never known with any other woman he had tasted. It was passion. God, the unbearable pain when they would share their pleasure right before him. How she relished the tears coming from the eyes of her precious sculptures that surrounded them as they made love like none other. A passion that grew more intense as her precious meat sculptures wished, even prayed for them to stop. And his mistress knew this. She felt it in the air. The lust. The love. For the first time, my friends, for my sweet, this was truly hell. How can one deny these intense feelings for this mistress? No matter how hard my sweet had tried hating her, her cruelty would always end with him loving her. This man, who is nothing more but a pitiful, weeping flesh strung up on hooks, realizing how much of a fool he was when seeking the ultimate thrill, his sexual expectations of paradise is but a mere fantasy when realizing that he's just material for the Cenobite. My sweet, a name that is meaningless and given to all her sculptures. Mere decorations, works of art for her warped fantasy. Yes, she is aware of the souls who are brought to her domain, those who were seeking the ultimate sexual satisfaction, foolish souls not knowing the depth of their desires. After all the women my sweet had used to satisfy his pleasure, like every soul that ended up here, had reached their limitations on the mortal realm, grew bored of what the world had to offer, and sought out the Cenobites when wanting something more, something greater. And yes, the Cenobites understood this void, and they had delivered. My God, how they were all fools. How they were given a new level of sexual high when being infected with these unfamiliar emotions. It was love. A love for their mistress. Beyond physical pain is a pain that far exceeds one's wildest imagination. It is a love that would have these souls slowly descend into an unexpected madness. No matter how much my sweet tried hating her, the hatred for his mistress had only driven him deeper into wanting to love her. My sweet, helpless to the horror of being deeply consumed with this desire for her. And even though my sweet had maintained his struggle of blocking out the ecstasy between his mistress and the delivery boy, he had almost missed that small moment of satisfaction. How my sweet relished the inner pleasure when seeing the inner sadness corrupting their love. Their passion being incomplete with knowing that the delivery boy had no lips to kiss her with. But love in this paradise is strong. Even in hell, love is worth the sacrifice. And when my sweet would witness his mistress comforting the delivery boy's sadness, soothing his rage with her delicate touch, that was when my sweet began to develop an intense fear, for he knew what was coming when she spoke of making sacrifices, that their love for each other was greater than even the most proudest of her creations. Imagine the undeniable horror overwhelming my sweet. Would be quite the show for a man who viewed women as nothing more but pieces of meat to satisfy his primitive ways. Is it not exciting to be on the other end? To be a mere object for one's pleasure? A sexual high of being truly expendable? Faced with the undeniable reality that you are no longer a man, but property to be toyed with and disposed of on a whim. Is it not amusing when seeing my sweet trying to deny the inevitable, the reality of what's to come? To cling on to that sliver of hope to ease his thoughts, that out of all the others in this wonderland, she wouldn't choose him, her proudest creation. His mistress would never ruin her proudest work for this delivery boy. But when feeling the passionate touch of his mistress, my sweet stricken with the intense terror when knowing that out of all the sculptures, she chose him, my sweet, trying to grasp onto this need to hate his mistress when feeling her cut into his flesh, trying to think of a fantasy of murdering and inflicting the worst form of torture upon this twisted woman, and no matter how hard he tried, these were thoughts that never came. Peeling the flesh away from his face, dear God, my sweet still loved her as he watched her place the strip of flesh onto her lover's face. And all that my sweet could hope for within this paradise is that his mistress would use the rest of him up for her twisted creations. Spare him from the torment. But why would a Cenobite goddess waste such good suffering, knowing that it only brought more passion into her realm? Imagining the immense torture that my sweet would experience when watching this delivery boy passionately kiss her with his own lips. So what do you think, my friends? Should this soul be spared from this twisted wonderland? Or continue enjoying the artistic horror show as an expendable piece of weeping flesh? Looks like your friend Mickey is getting back on his feet again. So excited to share that unremitting horror. Stories that will make you wriggle and writhe, sharing a new perspective in the vast world of horror. Anyways, today's tale of terror is a reflection of how unfair life can truly be, especially when you're surrounded by others who have that very thing you so desire. Being infected with these terrible thoughts of envy, how these inner feelings poison our way of thinking rather than embracing what we have. There's no shame in admitting this sin when looking at the world around you, carrying those poisonous thoughts, that it's not fair, that you don't get to enjoy the same experiences as others do. I hope today's story shows the exciting conclusion when one decides to feed into these feelings. The woman you see before you, Sarah, for so many years she had carried these horrible feelings of envy and depression, a perfect mixture of emotions that has driven her into achieving the very thing that she couldn't have, motherhood. This story is about a woman's quest against the unfairness of this world, her pursuit of bearing children, and how far she's willing to go to overcome what is believed to be impossible. And what happens when this quest takes her into the deepest, darkest parts of the world. My friends, I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to bless you with a story that will make you feel very uncomfortable with a happy ending that nobody wants, but is desperately asked for. For many years, Sarah had tried achieving her goals with the men of our world. Even though she was with many, ruined marriages, failed relationships, one-night stands gone wrong. Deep down, Sarah had no love for these men, the intimate passion slowly fading away, a woman that only held the desire to be given the seed of life. Except with men, it wasn't that simple. Sure, intimacy was incredibly easy with men, but she knew that none of them were devoted to her goals of reaching motherhood, which is why Sarah would deceive them with the belief that she couldn't bear any children. How easy it is to lure men into the act of intimacy with promises of having the full experience, seducing these men with sweet words of fantasy, not knowing that they were participating into making her dreams become a reality. Except Sarah would come to learn that there was truth to this deceitful act when she discovered that her body couldn't bear any children. Even though Sarah had went to see several doctors, hoping to get an opinion or form of treatment that could fulfill her hopes of carrying children, Sarah never realizing how her desperation was causing her to be oblivious to the amount of money she was wasting on visits and experiments that were hopeless, causing Sarah's world to turn dark when it was for certain that she couldn't bear any children of her own. But Sarah's desperation still maintained, which is why she went ahead and did what many of us are thinking, by going to the adoption agency, hoping to adopt and raise a child of her own. But even adoption was hopeless. The adoption agency would say that Sarah was unqualified due to her being a single woman, and the money she made monthly was insufficient. And when Sarah's desperation had corrupted her morals, taking her to the black market, her efforts for a child was still without hope because of how she didn't have money. For some people in this world, they can be an example of how life can be cruel and unfair. Their lives showing us how the world truly doesn't revolve around us. Just because we have fantasy expectations doesn't mean that life is going to go our way. Obviously, Sarah is one of those people, being in the world with other people who have the very thing she so desires. There is confusion, a need to understand this hardship, a deeper look at herself, carefully thinking upon every act, every decision she made in life. Where in life has she gone wrong to deserve this? And Sarah trying to find answers to questions that were left unanswered and ignored by a higher power, her faith in God deteriorating by this obsession to have the very thing she wants that she rightfully deserves. It explains why Sarah acquired the laminate configuration and turned to the servants of hell to fulfill her goals. Holding the laminate configuration, studying its cubic design, its artistic decoration, analyzing its features for a better understanding of solving this contraption that's supposedly the gateway to hell. Sarah was fully aware that she had no understanding of this contraption, but had the strong belief that this object of holy terror will have the very thing she seeks. She heard of them, the Cenobites, the stories, how they would come when being called upon, how they would grant you your deepest, darkest desires. She had also heard of the warnings as well. Even though they will come and grant you the very thing you desire, tread carefully when making a bargain with the Cenobites. Of course, there was fear within Sarah when seeing the laminate configuration unraveling itself in her hands, the box answering her desperate pleas. Completely oblivious to the thoughts buried deep in the back of her mind, how she was making a grave mistake. That terrible fear being washed away with the thoughts of meeting an extraordinary Cenobite, who would make her become a mother to an extraordinary child. Sarah being bathed with a glowing light, the scent of vanilla in the air, and standing before her was him, her calls being answered by an extraordinary Cenobite. There was no fear when gazing upon the Cenobite's towering appearance, just the feelings of bliss when knowing that Sarah's journey had finally met its conclusion. Not sure if he was an angel nor a devil, his body both decorated with ritualistic scars and his flawless physique, he was unlike no other man she's seen, for he was more than man. He was beyond perfect for Sarah. Sarah hadn't need any words to explain her reasons for calling upon the Cenobite. Immediately he knew her struggles, her desires, and knowing why she was offering her body and soul to the Cenobite. The Cenobite tossing the laminate configuration to the side. Oh yes, He can easily give this woman a child, an extraordinary child. In fact, he can give her many extraordinary children, knowing how she will enjoy the sweet suffering of birthing something so beautiful. Yes, this Sarah will have a purpose, a valuable role to fulfill, for her journey has came to an end, and be rewarded for her efforts. And having Sarah making herself ready by lying on the bed and prepare herself for the first child. How amusing it is to see a lamb offering itself so willingly, and the sweet suffering when one receives his or her deepest desires. How Sarah's long journey for motherhood would end with her screaming in horror and pain. Yes, my friends, Sarah had gotten what she desired, to be a mother of a child. 9 long months, confined and overlooked within the pits of hell, her body being fed the needed nutrients through tubes injected into several parts of her body. 9 months of pain, feeling its fingers within her. Sarah is an extraordinary child. Very soon, Sarah is about to give birth. Obviously, this is not what Sarah expected. And when Sarah was ready to give birth, the Cenobite, ready to see his part of the bargain being fulfilled when assisting Sarah, excited to witness the excruciating pain, the immense suffering of Sarah birthing her first child. When the suffering, the crippling pain receded, the Cenobite holding the infant, showing pride over her perfect creation. Except in Sarah's world, perfection isn't what she imagined when the Cenobite showed Sarah the child. What she saw was an unremitting horror that diminished every shred of ignorance and fantasy that muddled her mind trying to deny the reality of this being an infant child, her child, its deformed, mutated body, signs of life showing pain and suffering. The Cenobite handling the child like an object, twisting its body and stretching its face, turning it into a mangled creature. As promised, Sarah became a mother of an extraordinary child. Human, Cenobite, and lamnic configuration all wrapped up in one tidy package. Sarah should be proud with what she did, how she fulfilled her role as mother, a mother of many children that will open a doorway to a new realm in hell. Yes, many children, which was part of the bargain, of course. Isn't that the reasons why Sarah called upon the Cenobites? To be mother of many extraordinary children? And the Cenobite turning to the grotesque monstrosity, a mindless servant, another Cenobite creature that was the twisted result of its master's morbid fascination of discovering new means of pain and suffering. This thing that severely lacked the features of what Sarah would describe as a suitable mate. The actual father of the mangled child, the key component to Sarah's goals of motherhood. Sarah, overwhelmed with horror when the Cenobite demanded his assistant to immediately make another child, for they have much more extraordinary children to make. Another 9 months of pain and suffering, and another 9 months, and another, and another, and another. For Sarah has plenty of time, all the time in hell. One of my favorite comedians are the people who try defining themselves as the incarnation of evil. The individual you see before you, named Peter, has quite the story to share. Another comedian who thinks he's singing the devil's tune. Oh, make no mistake, this guy has written quite a tale of terror during his days of being evil. Supposedly, Peter is a man who had mastered the art of human cruelty and suffering. To him, it's an art, a skill that he prides in, just enough to please and provide the Lord of Flesh with plenty of souls. And here we are, witnessing the conclusion of his sadistic quest, a pilgrim that should not be without his reward. Peter embarked on quite of a journey to be in this dark, dank room, his body chained and strapped against a contraption of metal, wood, nails, spikes, rusted shards penetrating and cutting into his flesh, like fresh cattle being prepped for the slaughtering. The smell of sweat, vanilla lingering in the air. Even the piss and feces beneath Peter's hanging carcass had brought a forbidden excitement for what's yet to come. I wonder if people will show pity for this man, or what's left of him, seeing him try to muster enough signals to push through the immense pain and proceed with the negotiation with his audience, the servants of Leviathan, the Cenobites. For so many years, Peter anticipated this moment to prove his worth. But before we start shedding tears for Peter, I think it's best to hear his story, a reason why this man is to be rewarded immortality and to become one of them, a Cenobite. If you knew where to hunt, the right victims to stalk, you'd be surprised how a city never fails on providing a fresh supply of lambs. Which explains why Peter would find himself riding the subway at night. Once in a while, he would find a woman riding alone, possibly going home after work. Just by looking at her, you can easily see the nervousness within her. Something about this night that seems different from the others. A danger that is lurking around the corner, a life-altering event that will never be forgotten. Peter always enjoyed the sight of his prey, hearing the silent prayers for a safe arrival. Always looking over their shoulder, too afraid to make any eye contact, terribly suspicious of everyone around them. Such vulnerable, easy prey. When they reached their destination, Peter will follow them as they rushed from the subway and into the urban jungle above. At that moment, he would call out to them with his thoughts, letting them know of his presence, exhilarating that fear, flooding their mind with such horrid possibilities at once, watching them slowly drown in terror. To let her know, at any given moment, Peter could easily take them, a connection that makes them feel helpless. But no, Peter would rather embrace the exquisite terror as he would close in the distance between himself and his prey. Fear, how they reek of it. A fragrance that aroused Peter. And as they smelled his aroma, as he could smell them, that is when Peter would make his move. A moment where Peter could see every nightmare they'd ever dreamed of replaying in their mind, having them obtain that full experience of terror in its purest form and forcing them to the ground, punishing them. It was essential to let them plead for mercy, to scream for help, to spill their whole life in a desperate attempt to achieve empathy from their attacker, wasting their final moments crying for help within a city that has no care. And at that very moment, when they would expect the worst, Peter would stop, fish for a wallet, any piece of identification, and read out loud their full names and addresses. At that moment, he will let them know they're not ready, and taking the identification with the promises of finishing what he started when the time is right. And as a creative touch to a work of art, Peter would leave whistling or singing something pleasant. Of course, such acts are not enough to gain Leviathan's favor. A lack of creativity, no imagination. Oh no, you see, that was only the beginning of Peter's work of art. demanding his just reward. Well, here he is, a man who had reached the end of his journey and ready to reap the spoils of his hard work to please the Lord of Flesh behind those pale, emotionless expressions on the mutilated faces of his audience. Surely these servants of hell must find his story impressive. The story has merit. Any Cenobite will admit that it shows potential, except there is the concern and a lack of understanding with the philosophies that the Cenobites must abide and what truly drawn this man here. This story, the Cenobites must ask, is it pleasure and pain that brought Peter here? Or is he here to seek pleasure in the suffering of others? You see, Peter's story is very ancient. Throughout human history, there have been so many who have pursued the tales of the Cenobites, blindly offering themselves to the Lord of Flesh with rituals and even stories like Peter's, and to call upon the Cenobites and achieve the rewards for their loyalty and efforts. Even though very few have joined the order, many found themselves being misinformed during their studies and research. You see, the pleasure in having power over others is an experience that holds very little to no value within this realm, whereas the pleasure in pain and suffering itself holds endless opportunities in areas that are yet to be explored, something that far exceeds mankind's cruel appetite for the suffering of others. And this man, Peter, who's about to taste a pain that could never be experienced on earth, and will be legendary. In time, he will come to understand the ways of the Cenobite and how blind he was to the potential that was seen by the Lord of Flesh. It should bring enlightenment that the instruments being used to educate this pilgrim are creations from similar innovative minds who have chased the same goals of immortality. And as the crude construction maintained its course of shedding away Peter's identity of flesh, Peter wasting away his screams for the rightful reward that's owed to him, When will he become one of them, demanding his rightful reward to the Cenobites walking away? And the last thing Peter heard before they walked off. Perhaps later.
All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake in the day to find that it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act their dream with open eyes to make it possible. This